Absolute chaos, baby, and that's what we're here to see. Fucking crazy stuff going down on the field. And we got more of that crazy stuff. Ligue 2 in France. We don't get to spend a lot of time in France. Maybe that's because France has its shit together. We don't have any we do sometimes have crazy stuff to talk about in France, like the fact that the top league didn't have a TV deal until 5 minutes before the season kicked off. But that sounds like a them problem, and we're not even in the top league. We're in the second division, where some guys, it seems if Sivu played a little too hard. For this match, we're going to go to Bastia against Pau. Not Pau Gasol, former NBA great, a different Pau, a club called Pau FC. Is in Pau, and they played a 1-1 draw against Bastia, which is very important for both of these teams because they're firmly mid-table and just, trying to feel something, like Crystal Palace fans who haven't felt something for nearly 10 years, right? They're trying to go one of two directions, and they ended up with this draw. And the draw happened because terrible penalty call in the final seconds. Bastia is able to score that terrible penalty call to even this out at 1-1. But the drama doesn't have to do with that. Although this was an edgy game where a bunch of people were arguing the penalty call afterwards, as they should have been. It was an absolutely terrible call, in my opinion. But about 15, 20 minutes before that, 77th, 78th minute, it's 1-0 to Pau. Bastia has been the better team. They get more shots, more possession, all that sort of stuff. But they're flopping all over the place. All right? All this time wasting, all this nonsense, all this kicking the ball away, the dark arts. And at a certain point, the Bastia head coach, Benoit Tavenot, he has enough. He just has enough. He loses it. He actually just loses it. Here you go. The ball goes out of play, at which point Pau, who's in the yellow, and Bastia, who's in the blue, are both arguing to see, whose ball it is. And the decision comes that it is going to be Bastia's ball. But this guy from Pau decides to try and pick the ball up, at which point the manager, Benoit Tavenot, just runs into him. Now, I'm going to need your opinion on this, all right? Because we're going to get a few angles. We're going to get a few replays. How out of line was this exactly? Because the jury is still out for me in this particular instance. What's a little off the chain is he then proceeds to drag the man further away from the field. I don't really know the logical reason for this. Okay, I think it might have just been he didn't expect the guy to be on the ground and now he doesn't know what to do, so he starts dragging him away from the field. Obviously, the Pau players start to get in his face, and he's giving them a piece of their mind. I always wonder what they're saying doing this sort of stuff. Like, it's pretty clear this guy just got fed up with the nonsense that was happening on the field here in Ligue 2. But, everybody on the entire field is going to have a nice coming together. And the referee's just going to back up for a second. They're going to let these two teams sort it out, right? We're not going to fisticuffs, right? But we're dealing with a manager who just dragged a player on the other team towards his dugout. I mean, this looks like one of those spiders on planet Earth or something that's dragging something back to its lair. He just picks the guy up and starts dragging him back. But let's get to a replay, because the reason that I wanted to break down the replay is I feel like I end up with a lot more sympathy for Benoit Tavenot after the replay than you have before. Because initially when you're watching it, you're like, oh, you just can't do that, right? You can't just run over and bump a guy and then start dragging him off the field. But this guy goes down so easily. Tavenot comes over, right? And this is clearly not the first offense in this instance. All right, the dark arts have been, this is basically the seventh Harry Potter book at this point. Okay, the dark arts have been applied for a long time. All right, we're not dealing with Grindelwald anymore. We got the whole noseless shebang. And he just comes over and he tries to slap the ball, and he kind of grabs the back of the jersey. I don't really see him push him down. The guy just falls. It's like somebody pulls a trap door underneath where he's standing. He just goes down, right? So he runs up and he kind of grabs his shirt and slaps the ball away, at which point he just falls down. And in a moment of temporary insanity, which is an actual legal term, Benoit Tavenot just starts dragging him because he's incredibly infuriated. Now, I always try and put myself in a particular position here, right? There's a couple different things to consider, but I always try to put myself in the position of the person that I'm watching, right? And I can see myself. I have a very slow burning temper, okay? Football Manager sets it off faster than most things, but when that temper eventually goes, I do get incredibly frustrated. And there's nothing I get more incredibly frustrated with than this sort of stuff, right? Time wasting really grinds my gears. Like all the dark arts, all the wind up stuff that's not in the spirit of the game, right? It always bothered me. I always hated it. It's always driven me crazy. So if you have somebody that's doing a lot of that and knows that it's the other team's ball, but's picking it up to do like some pretend throw in that ends up wasting 30 to 45 more seconds, I could see myself coming over to like try and get the ball from that person. He goes a little farther than that. Maybe I wouldn't have been grabbing the back of the shirt, but I could see myself going over to be like, hey, you know it's our ball, give us the ball, right? You're also in the coach's box, so this is my domain, right? Get, fucking watch yourself. You know what I'm saying? But then after he falls down like that, right? I could see myself getting whipped into a rage where for a moment, you're not actually trying to harm the guy, obviously, but for a moment you're just like, but you have that overflowing of just, like you just angry and you just kind of drag him for a second and then you put him down and you're like, yeah, well, it's not, to me, overly violent conduct. It's also wrong. You can't do this, right? And I'm not saying this guy shouldn't be suspended. I'm not saying this guy shouldn't be fined. I'm not saying this guy shouldn't be punished. I'm just saying I understand it. I understand this boiling of frustration. And I think it's disingenuous, obviously, for the players of the other team and whatever, to pretend that they don't understand where this outburst has come from. Right? He's got to be able to handle the situation better than that as a manager, right? Because I'm also not somebody that is managing a club in the French second division, right? This guy's had to deal with this a little more on the touchline than I have, right? But I always feel like it's disingenuous watching these clips where they're like, how could you? What have you done? Oh, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Right? And everybody goes sprinting over to him. I mean, this is wanton time wasting to go pick this ball up. And then more wanton time wasting and just collapsing in a heap, right? He's done everything he possibly can to antagonize the coach, and it ended up working, right? And at a certain point, I guess you kind of reap what you sow. And I think another reason that I feel okay with that kind of feeling towards this incident, because it is kind of crazy to see a coach dragging a player towards the dugout, is how much contrition this guy showed right after. He said, I'm 48 and I can't react like this. It's totally my fault. He understands the disciplinary committee is going to convene on Wednesday. They're going to analyze the incident. According to that, he's potentially facing a 6-month ban. To his credit, though, he said, in a normal company, what I did can be sanctioned by a dismissal. I have not yet spoken to my president, but if I were him, I would ask myself that question. And I think it would be harsh to do 6 months. I think that this is red card. Obviously he was given a red card during the match. He was given his marching orders kind of a minute after this when everything calmed down. I think a fine and suspend him for 6 matches and then he can come back. I think with the amount of contrition and the amount of different things that led up to it, and when you watch the replay from different angles, I don't think this guy is a danger to players on the other team. I think he understands exactly what went wrong, and I think it was just an exceedingly frustrating moment. It was also unfortunate in that it had very close proximity to the bench and everything. But look, you should never end up in a situation where you were dragging a player on the other team. That just shouldn't happen. It should always be punished with fines and suspensions. But the longer in a world where VAR exists that we allow players to play dumb and time waste, to flop egregiously, the more infuriated different people like this are going to be, right? Because it seems to be getting worse and worse. It doesn't seem to be getting better. And like I said, eventually you're going to reap what you sow. Eventually you're going to get what you wish for, and somebody's actually going to lose their marbles for a second and start dragging you into their lair.